What's up, Psychedelic Investors? My name's James, and you're watching The Psychedelic Investor, your number one news source for psychedelic stocks. Today, it is my pleasure to bring to you This Week in Psychedelic Stocks for the trading week ended on April 23rd. And because there was so much news this week, we are going to be once again splitting this episode in two different parts. Today, we're going to be looking at all the general news that happened that will affect all the different companies in the field. And then tomorrow, we're going to look at the company-specific news. And boy, was there a lot of groundbreaking company-specific news this week, so make sure you stay tuned for that episode. But today, we're going to be doing a few things. First, we're going to look at a study looking at the rates of adverse effects in treating depression with esketamine, a treatment that companies like Johnson & Johnson and FieldTrip are using. Second, we're going to look at a study looking at the creativity benefits of taking psychedelics, specifically psilocybin. Then we're going to pivot over to the first ever clinical trial testing the safety profile of a compound called 5-MeO-DMT. And then we're going to close out this episode by looking at a couple updates on decriminalization efforts. But first, if you enjoy this episode, make sure you invest in the channel with your like and subscribe. Over time, you'll see your investment grow as we continue to bring you the information that you need to know before investing in the psychedelic medicines field. Enjoy the episode. To start off this episode, we're going to be looking at a new study that looks at the likelihood of having adverse events happening when treating treatment-resistant depression with esketamine as compared to other antidepressant medications. And I'm going to tell you guys right off the bat that the results here, they're not so positive, though this is just one of two studies that we're going to be looking at today, and the other one did have positive results. So if you only want to hear the good news, you can just go ahead down there, see the timestamps, and you can skip ahead of this. But for those of you who remain, hang tight, we're going to be through the bad news before you know it. So, if the results of this study hold, it's going to have major implications for companies using ketamine and esketamine to treat depression, such as Numinus, Johnson & Johnson, and FieldTrip Health. The study, which was published in the journal Psychotherapy and Psychosomatics, looked at the adverse events reported to the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System database for the period between March 2019 and March 2020 for people being treated for treatment-resistant depression. The key takeaways here is that, quote, patients who receive esketamine for treatment-resistant depression are at increased risks for serious and unexpected adverse events as compared to other methods of treating depression. Some of said adverse effects that esketamine patients faced at higher proportions than standard antidepressant medication patients were dissociation, sedation, and suicidal ideation, as well as autoscopy, panic attacks, and paranoia. According to the lead author, a lady named Chira Gastaldin, and I'm sorry, Chira, for butchering both your first and your last names, these results are important because this is the first real-world data on the safety profile of esketamine. She adds that this drug might carry a clear potential for serious and unexpected adverse events that were not reported by approved trials. Important to note is that serious adverse effects were significantly more common among women, patients given higher doses of esketamine, those who were also taking mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, and other types of antidepressants. Now, having said all of this, these results are in no way conclusive. For example, though we can see that there is a higher total number of incidents for those that used esketamine, as noted by the author, it is impossible in this type of study to infer causality or to calculate the real incidence of these adverse events because we don't have the total number of prescriptions for the patients. Furthermore, we need to have a risk-benefit calculation. We now understand that there are significant risks when it comes to esketamine. However, the risks of unsuccessfully treating depression may be greater. In the words of Robert McIntyre, who we've actually covered on this podcast before, and he belongs to the University of Toronto, by the way, there is always a calculus in medicine. In other words, what is the bad and what is the good in the treatment? We're talking about treatment-resistant depression, the world's leading cause of disability, and it's the disorder that is most often associated with suicide, which is claiming over 1 million lives a year. So this is a serious public health problem and is obviously going to affect the risk-benefit calculation. At this point, the data suggests that we have sufficient evidence to say that there is something we should be concerned about, and here he's talking about the adverse effects, so we should keep an eye on it. But at this stage, by no means would I say that the risk would warrant not considering giving ketamine to a patient with depression. So guys, look, I have a few thoughts on this study. First, the incomplete nature of the study combined with its results demonstrates the need for a large-scale comparative trial testing both the effectiveness and the adverse effects of ketamine to treat depression as compared to standard methods. In fact, we probably need dozens of such studies to ensure that we come to a scientific consensus. Now, having said that, if these results hold, as mentioned, we need a cost-benefit analysis. For example, if there are both more adverse effects using ketamine to treat depression, but it's also more effective in treating a particular population, is it still worth it? These are questions that are going to need to be answered. And finally, if these results hold, obviously, it will have negative long-term consequences for companies that are focusing heavily on ketamine and esketamine therapy, such as FieldTrip and Johnson & Johnson. So we're just going to have to keep an eye on this and bring you any updates as they happen. Next up, one of the most common anecdotal experiences and lasting effects of psychedelics has reportedly been a boost to creativity. However, apparently, a scientific placebo-controlled study into this has never been done. Until now. Recently, a new study was published in Translational Psychiatry where 30 people dosed with psilocybin, along with another 30 people in the placebo group, were tested both during the psilocybin session and a week after it ended on two types of creativity: convergent thinking and divergent thinking. The first one represents the ability to generate a single optimal solution to a problem, while the second one represents the ability to generate many solutions to a problem with several possible answers. On top of completing tasks which required the two forms of creativity and measuring their success, the participants also had brain scans completed. So there are two key findings of this study: creativity levels during the psilocybin session and creativity levels a week after it wore off. On the first metric, both convergent thinking and divergent thinking decreased while the participants were dosed. So if that were the only finding of the study, then obviously the results would be quite negative. However, they also measured creativity a week after the dosing session. Here, they found that divergent thinking in particular significantly increased in the psilocybin group, though not convergent thinking. This means that, quote, a week after receiving psilocybin, participants tended to generate more novel ideas for uses of everyday objects compared to those who received the placebo. So rather than trying to interpret this myself with my little monkey brain, I'm just going to go ahead and give you the words of the lead researcher, a woman named Natasha Mason, who gave these comments in an interview with SciPost. She said, "We used classic measures of creativity, for example, the alternate uses test, in which people have to come up with as many uses as possible for a brick. Here, we found that under the influence of a psychedelic, individuals performed worse than placebo. In other words, they came up with fewer uses for a brick, and the uses that they did come up with were not any more original than those in the placebo. However, individuals reported that they felt more creative throughout the day, in that they said they had more experiences of insight and were able to figure out solutions to their own personal problems. This could mean one of two things. First, either under the influence of psychedelics, people's idea generation and evaluation, creativity, is impaired, but their feelings of the quality of ideas is enhanced. Or we are seeing a difference in types of creativity. Maybe psychedelics reduce individuals' deliberate creativity, task-based with an end goal, but increases spontaneous creativity or insight." We also asked participants to come back 7 days later and repeat the tasks. Here, we see that after psilocybin, individuals performed better on one part of the task. Namely, they were able to come up with more novel responses. Thus, we see that maybe psychedelics do increase aspects of deliberate creativity in the long run. Speaking on the implications of these findings for psychedelic therapy to treat issues like anxiety and depression, she says, "Psychedelics are currently being investigated to treat a number of mental health disorders characterized by rigid, inflexible thought patterns like anxiety and depression. Thus, it could be suggested that the ability of psilocybin to acutely alter different aspects of creative thinking could aid in the therapeutic process by opening up a window of opportunity where the therapeutic interventions could prove more effective. Namely, while under the influence of a psychedelic, rigid thought content could be decreased, while unguided, spontaneous thoughts may give rise to new insights and perspectives of previous events and current problems. Patients may then be able to integrate these insights with a therapist and come up with new, more effective strategies that facilitate adaptive interpretation and coping abilities. Thus, future studies should be employed in clinical populations in order to assess this proposal, as well as the underlying neurobiological mechanisms. So I'm going to go ahead and give you some of my thoughts here, which of course won't be as eloquent as Mason's thoughts, but I'll try my best. So first, obviously, the study needs to be reproduced with a much larger sample size. I say that after literally every study we cover, but it's still true. We need to be at bigger populations and more people just involved in this. So other than that, the results seem to be pretty positive, combining the positive long-term divergent thinking creativity boost produced by psilocybin with the lead author's optimism. Given her results for psilocybin's usefulness in treating issues like anxiety and depression, we have some tentative positive results here. Obviously, some people argue that the positive benefits that come along with psilocybin and creativity are much more widespread than was found in this study, but it was nevertheless positive, and I am happy with it. If the results are true, there are positive implications for all companies using psychedelics, particularly psilocybin and perhaps LSD, since it's so similar. For example, I see this as a small validation for companies like Compass, MindMed, and Numinus, among many, many others, Mydecine, and other companies too. Next up, we're pivoting to a story where researchers in Europe and the United States have teamed up to produce the first ever 5-MeO-DMT psychedelic training program. The group, Beckley Psytech, has raised over $22 million in funding and developed an intranasal formulation of a synthetic 5-MeO-DMT that's set to be tested later this year. CEO of Beckley Psytech, Cosmo Mellon, says that we'll be breaking brand new ground with the first clinical trial on intranasal 5-MeO-DMT, conducting an initial phase 1 trial with 42 participants. I don't know yet too much about 5-MeO-DMT, guys, other than the effects are apparently radically different than regular DMT, but as a compound, it's very exciting, and it hasn't really been studied at much, or like at all even. So it's very encouraging that we're getting this phase 1 safety trial. I don't really know what 5-MeO-DMT could be used to treat, but we're going to keep an ear to the ground, and we'll let you know if we hear any results or any kind of whispers of what this compound will be used to treat in the future. Lastly, we're just going to touch on a couple of decriminalization efforts in the United States' 2 largest states. First up, we're going to be talking about the California bill to legalize the possession of psychedelics, as it has just cleared a second Senate committee. So we've actually talked about this bill before in the past. Actually, we talked about it the last time it passed a Senate hearing committee. So I don't really know how many of these committees it's going to have to go through, but apparently next it's going to move to the Appropriations Committee. So it might be a while before this ever reaches the Senate floor and we get a vote on it. But I'll still give you a little reminder of what is in this bill. It would, quote, remove criminal penalties for possessing and sharing numerous psychedelics, including psilocybin mushroom, DMT, ibogaine, LSD, and MDMA, for adults 21 years and older. As well, it expunges the records of prior convictions for offenses that the bill makes lawful. For psilocybin, the legislation would repeal provisions in California statute that prohibit the cultivation of transportation or any spores or mycelium capable of producing mushrooms or other material that contain the psychoactive ingredient. This would make psilocybin essentially legal in California, at least to consume and share, though not to sell. But hopefully, that too could soon change, as activists in California are attempting to get a 2022 ballot initiative passed where the voters of that state would get to vote on legalizing the retail sale of psilocybin. So hopefully that will happen also, but we'll have to wait probably a year to find that out. So again, I do believe that this bill is likely to pass, like I said last time, unless a larger political issue like a potential recall of their governor that they're going through there right now gets in the way. So hopefully that doesn't really happen and this bill does get passed, as California is the largest state in the union, and its passage would have dual effects of helping millions of people on one hand, and on the other hand, setting up an environment that is beneficial to psychedelic medicine's investors. Finally, moving to the second largest state, Texas, there is a bill that has been tabled there that is calling for a clinical study of psilocybin to treat veterans with PTSD. So we've talked about this also in the past, and I've actually said that I don't think this is likely to pass because, you know, it's Texas. But perhaps this just became a little bit more likely, and that is because former Governor Rick Perry has thrown his weight behind it. So I'm not really sure how much political influence Perry still has in the state, or whether he is exerting any political capital to get it passed, but it does appear more likely now to be passed than it did last week. So we're just going to sit here with our fingers crossed, and we'll bring you any updates as they happen. So that's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please make sure that you're liked and subscribed. Not only will it support the channel, but also it will ensure that you keep seeing the information like this that you need to know before investing in the psychedelic medicines landscape. Also, make sure you stay tuned for tomorrow's episode, where we're going to be talking about some of the groundbreaking developments that have happened with companies like Atai and MindMed. So that is definitely a must-watch episode. If you want to stay together for a little bit longer, you can click on one of the videos you see on your screen now so we can spend a little bit of time together. Bye guys, I love you all. I'll see you again soon. This is James from the Psychedelic Investor, signing out.